She forgot to hang up the phone. That's how I learned my own mother-in-law was planning to kick me out of the $800,000 house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 15 years. He's just a son-in-law, I heard her whisper to my wife. He has no real claim to this family. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I was sitting in my kitchen at 67 years old, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly tasted like ash. The extension phone in my hand felt heavy as lead. Martha's voice came through clear as day from upstairs, talking to her mother Eleanor like I didn't exist. "Mom, you're right," Martha said, and I could hear that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Frank's been acting like he owns everything around here." I did own everything around here. Every mortgage payment for 15 years had come from my construction business. Every utility bill, every property tax, every repair, all paid with money I'd earned with my own hands. "The Father's Day thing is perfect." Eleanor's voice crackled through the line. "We start small, make him understand his place." My place. In the house I'd been paying for since Martha was struggling to make ends meet as a divorced mother of two. In the family where I'd walked her kids down the aisle, paid for their college, been there for every graduation and birthday. But I wasn't blood. That's what this was really about. "Once we get the house transferred to your name only," Eleanor continued, "we can make our real move. He's getting older, Martha, more dependent. But legally, if something happens to him—" "I know, Mom." The lawyer explained everything. The lawyer. They'd been meeting with lawyers. About me. About my house. About my life. I set the coffee cup down with shaking hands. 20 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. Two women plotting my removal from a life I'd built and paid for, treating me like some burden they needed to manage. "Just remember," Eleanor's voice turned sharp, "he's not really family. He married into this. But blood is blood. Those are my grandchildren, not his. This is our family home, not his. Our family home." I'd bought this house with money I'd saved from my first marriage. Back when I was a widower trying to start over, Martha had been so grateful then, so loving when I offered her and her kids stability and security. "The divorce papers are almost ready," Martha said quietly. "If he fights us on Father's Day, we'll know he's going to be difficult about everything else." Divorce papers. They were already that far along. I didn't know then that my life was about to be destroyed in the next 10 minutes. "What about the business?" Eleanor asked. "That construction company is worth a fortune. The lawyer says because we've been married so long I'm entitled to half of everything. Maybe more, considering how he's been, controlling. Controlling because I paid the bills and expected basic respect in return. Good girl. You deserve better than being some old man's nursemaid. You're still young enough to find real love. Real love. 20 years together, and I was just a convenience, a paycheck with legs." I heard footsteps upstairs, moving toward the stairs. They were finishing their call. In a moment, Martha would come down and smile at me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been planning my emotional and financial destruction with her mother. "I have to go," Martha whispered. "He might hear. Just remember, sweetheart, you don't owe him anything. He chose to take care of us. That was his decision." The line went dead. I sat there holding the extension phone, staring at it like it might explain how my marriage had become a business transaction I was losing. But that wasn't the worst thing she said. The worst came when I heard Martha's phone ring again immediately. I picked up the extension one more time. "Did you tell him about Father's Day yet?" Eleanor's voice was eager, excited. "Not yet. I'm going to do it in the morning, nice and casual, like it's no big deal." "Perfect. Let's see how he reacts. If he fights us on something this small, we'll know we need to move faster on the bigger things." They were testing me. This wasn't just about Father's Day. This was about breaking me down piece by piece until I'd accept anything they decided for me. "Mom, what if he gets suspicious? What if he finds out about the papers I've been signing?" Papers she'd been signing. "What papers?" "He won't. Men his age. They don't pay attention to details anymore. Besides, he trusts you completely. That's his weakness. My weakness was loving someone who saw that love as stupidity. I just want this over with, Martha sighed. I want him out, and I want my life back. Her life back. From what? From financial security? From having someone who loved her unconditionally? From never having to worry about rent or groceries or car payments? Soon, baby. Very soon. Once we get the house in Martha's name only, we can make our move. I hung up the phone as quietly as I could, and sat in the dark kitchen surrounded by everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I thought was mine. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, the sprinkler system I'd installed was watering the garden I'd planted. In 6 hours, Martha would come downstairs and hand me my coffee with a smile. She'd kiss my cheek like she had every morning for 20 years. And then she'd tell me I wasn't welcome at Father's Day. I looked around the kitchen one more time, seeing it differently now. The cabinets I'd installed myself, the tile floor I'd laid on weekends, the window over the sink that looked out on the backyard where I'd taught her kids to ride bikes. None of it mattered to them. I was just the man who paid for everything and got in the way of what they really wanted. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years, and walked to my study. If they wanted to play games with papers and lawyers, they'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. I'd been building things with my hands for 45 years. I knew the importance of a solid foundation, and I was about to find out just how solid mine really was. The next morning, Martha handed me my coffee with a smile that felt like a knife. "Honey," she said sweetly, "Mom thinks it would be better if you skip Father's Day this year. It's really just for blood family." I took the coffee cup and stared at her. 20 years of marriage, and she delivered that line like she was commenting on the weather. Casual. Matter of fact. Like telling me I wasn't wanted at a celebration for the children I'd raised was nothing more than a scheduling change. Blood family? I repeated the words slowly, tasting how bitter they sounded. Well, yes. I mean, technically, Jason and Rebecca aren't your biological children. Mom just thinks it might be awkward, you know? Awkward. I'd walked Rebecca down the aisle 3 years ago because her biological father was too drunk to show up. I'd co-signed Jason's college loans and watched him graduate with a business degree, but it might be awkward to celebrate the day meant to honor fathers. Martha, I've been their stepfather for 20 years. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Step is the key word there, Frank. Look, it's not personal, it's just that Mom wants to keep things traditional this year. Traditional. Eleanor, who had never paid for a single thing in her grandchildren's lives, wanted to keep things traditional. What about the dinner reservations? I made them 2 weeks ago. Oh, we canceled those. Mom's making dinner at her place. Just family. Just family. I watched Martha fuss with the coffee maker, avoiding my gaze, and realized this wasn't a conversation, this was a notification. She'd already decided, they'd all already decided. Did you ask Jason and Rebecca how they feel about this? Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance, that I was making this harder than she'd planned. They understand. They know how important blood connections are to their grandmother, but not how important I've been to them. Frank, please don't make this dramatic. It's one dinner. One dinner. The same dinner I'd been paying for and attending for 2 decades. The same dinner where I'd listened to them talk about their jobs, their relationships, their problems, always ready, with advice or help or just an ear to listen. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence when I called them myself. Jason's phone went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Jason. Leave a message." No callback. Rebecca at least answered. "Hi, Frank." Not hi, Dad, like she'd called me since she was 12, just Frank. "Rebecca, I was hoping we could talk about Father's Day." A long pause. I could hear her breathing, weighing her words. "Look, Frank, this is really between you and Mom. I don't want to get in the middle of family stuff. Family stuff. Like I was some outsider causing problems. Not the man who'd sat up with her all night when she had pneumonia at 14, who'd taught her to drive, who'd helped her move into her first apartment. I am family, Rebecca. Another pause. Longer this time. Your mom's husband. That's different. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, feeling something crack inside my chest. You know what's worse than being hated? Being dismissed. Being erased? Having 20 years of love and sacrifice reduced to a technicality about blood relations. I spent the rest of the morning walking through the house, looking at pictures on the walls. Rebecca's high school graduation, where I stood proud in my best suit, arm around her shoulders. Jason's wedding, where he'd insisted I stand next to Martha in all the family photos. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations to Disney World that I'd planned and paid for. In every single photo I was there. Present, involved, smiling. But apparently, I'd been smiling at the wrong family. Father's Day morning arrived gray and rainy. Martha left early, dressed in the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. She kissed my cheek before she walked out the door. We'll be back around 8, she said. There's leftover casserole in the fridge. Leftover casserole. While they celebrated with prime rib at Eleanor's country club, I sat in my chair and waited for the phone to ring. Maybe one of them would call. Maybe they'd realize this was wrong. That you don't just erase someone from a family because it's convenient. The phone never rang. I didn't know then that while I was sitting alone in my house eating reheated casserole, Eleanor was already working on Martha about the next phase of their plan. Instead, I spent the day doing what I always did when I needed to think clearly. I went through my papers, bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, tax returns, 20 years of financial records that told the real story of this family. Every mortgage payment, Frank Morrison. Every insurance premium, Frank Morrison. Every property tax bill, Frank Morrison. Every college tuition payment, Frank Morrison. But according to Eleanor, I had no real claim to this family. I pulled out the folder I kept in my desk drawer. Important papers, legal documents, things Martha never looked at because she trusted me to handle the finances, had always trusted me. That trust was about to become very important. As I sat there in my study, surrounded by evidence of 20 years of financial responsibility, I started to see the pattern. The Father's Day exclusion wasn't random cruelty, it was strategic, a test run. They wanted to see how I'd react to being pushed aside, whether I'd fight back or just accept it, whether I was the kind of man who'd go quietly when they were ready to make their bigger moves. Martha came home at exactly 8 o'clock, smiling and relaxed, carrying leftovers from Eleanor's dinner. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, like nothing had happened. "Quiet," I said. She kissed the top of my head, the same casual affection she'd shown me for 20 years, but now it felt different. Calculated. Part of the performance. "I brought you some dessert. Mom made that chocolate cake you like." The same chocolate cake I'd been eating at family dinners for 2 decades. Now it was a consolation prize, delivered after the fact, like scraps for a dog who'd been shut outside. I took the container and thanked her. What else could I do? But as I watched Martha move around the kitchen, humming softly to herself, I realized something important. She thought this had gone perfectly. She thought I'd accepted my new place in the hierarchy without a fight. She was wrong. I went down to the basement to fix the water heater. The same basement I'd finished with my own hands. That's when I found the box hidden behind the furnace, filled with legal papers that had my forged signature on them. The box was tucked back in the corner, behind the water heater where only someone doing maintenance would find it, someone like me. I'd noticed it weeks ago but assumed it was just more of Martha's storage, boxes of Christmas decorations or old photos. Today, something made me look closer. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The box was heavier than it should have been for Christmas ornaments. When I opened it, my hands started shaking. Legal documents. Dozens of them. Property transfer papers, insurance beneficiary changes, loan applications, all bearing my signature, all documents I'd never seen before in my life. I knew my own signature. After 45 years in construction, I'd signed thousands of contracts, permits, and legal papers. These signatures looked like mine. But they felt wrong, too perfect, too consistent, like someone had been practicing. The first document was a property deed transfer, dated 3 months ago. According to this paper, I'd signed over half ownership of the house to Martha. The signature was mine, but I'd never signed it. The second was a change to our joint bank account, giving Martha sole access to funds. Again, my signature. Again, a document I'd never seen. But the third one made my blood run cold. It was a life insurance beneficiary change. My policy, which had always listed Martha as the beneficiary, had been altered to include a clause about mental incapacity. If I was deemed mentally incompetent, Martha would get immediate access to the death benefits even while I was still alive. Someone had been planning for my mental decline, or creating the legal framework to claim I was declining whether I was or not. I photographed every document with my phone, my construction worker's hands steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. 45 years of handling tools and machinery had taught me to stay calm in crisis situations, to document problems before trying to fix them. The fourth document was the worst yet. It was a draft divorce petition, not filed, just prepared, ready to go, when they needed it. The allegations made me sick to read. Respondent Frank Morrison has become increasingly controlling and financially abusive, the document claimed. Petitioner Martha Morrison fears for her safety and seeks immediate protection of marital assets. Controlling and financially abusive, because I'd paid every bill and expected basic respect in my own home. The petition requested emergency orders to freeze my business accounts, remove me from the house, and grant Martha temporary control of all marital property pending the divorce proceedings. Every single allegation was a lie, but they were the kind of lies that would be hard to disprove in court, especially if Martha testified tearfully about feeling threatened and afraid. But that wasn't the most chilling thing I found. At the bottom of the box was a handwritten note in Eleanor's distinctive scrawl, a plan laid out in bullet points like a business proposal. Phase 1. Establish pattern of Frank's mental decline. Document concerning behavior. Have Martha keep diary of incidents. Phase 2. Transfer assets gradually. Use forged signatures if necessary. Frank doesn't pay attention to paperwork anymore. Phase 3. Isolate Frank from family. Start with small exclusions, build to bigger ones. Make him seem paranoid if he objects. Phase 4. File for divorce with emergency orders. Use mental instability and financial abuse claims to get immediate asset protection. Phase 5. After divorce. If Frank contests, threaten guardianship proceedings. Claim he's incompetent to manage his affairs. I read that list 3 times, each reading making it worse. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a marriage falling apart naturally. This was a calculated plan to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. And they'd been implementing it for months. I found receipts showing Martha had been meeting with lawyers for 6 months, paying consultation fees with money from our joint account. Money I'd earned, being used to plan my legal destruction. There were also copies of bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our savings account. Small amounts, spread out over time, so I wouldn't notice. Martha had been building her own private account, funded with my money, preparing for war. The most sickening discovery was a folder of photographs. Pictures of me around the house, looking tired or distracted. Innocent moments when I was reading or thinking, but photographed to suggest confusion or mental decline. Evidence for their case that I was becoming incompetent. They'd been building a file on me, documenting my concerning behavior while I'd been living my normal life, trusting my wife, paying our bills, and trying to be a good husband and stepfather. I didn't know then that in 2 days Eleanor would push too hard and give me the opening I needed to turn this entire plan against them. I sat on my basement floor surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal I'd ever seen, and realized something important. They thought I was just a simple construction worker who didn't understand legal documents or complex financial planning. They were wrong about that too. In my desk upstairs was a business partnership agreement I'd signed 15 years ago, creating a legal entity that protected my construction business from personal liability. Martha wasn't listed anywhere on that paperwork because the business predated our marriage and she'd never been involved in running it. They could forge my signature on property transfers and bank accounts, but they couldn't touch the business that generated all our income. At least, not legally. I spent 2 hours photographing every document, every receipt, every handwritten note. Then I carefully placed everything back exactly where I'd found it. If they wanted to play games with forged documents and legal manipulation, they'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. I'd been signing contracts and reading legal paperwork since before Martha was out of high school. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this went, and who else was involved. I climbed the stairs from my basement, leaving that box of evidence exactly where I'd found it, and started planning my next move. Martha was in the living room, watching television and eating Eleanor's chocolate cake. She looked up when I came in, smiling like the loving wife she'd pretended to be for 20 years. "How's the water heater, honey?" "Fixed," I said. "Should be good for another few years." Unlike our marriage, I thought. But I didn't say that. Not yet. I waited until Eleanor came for her weekly dinner visit. Then I placed the forged documents on the table right next to her favorite china plate and said, "We need to talk." Eleanor's face went through several changes in the span of 10 seconds. Confusion first, then recognition, then panic, then rage. But it was Martha's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. She went completely white. Not the pale of surprise, but the bloodless white of someone whose carefully constructed lie had just collapsed in front of her. "What is this?" Eleanor demanded, but her voice was too loud, too aggressive, the voice of someone who knew exactly what it was. "You tell me," I said calmly. "I found these in a box in my basement with your handwritten plan." I spread the documents across the dining room table like I was dealing cards. Property transfers with forged signatures, bank account changes I'd never authorized, the draft divorce petition with its lies about abuse and mental incompetence, and Eleanor's handwritten battle plan laid out like a business proposal for destroying someone's life. Martha tried to speak first. "Frank, I can't explain." "Which signature?" I interrupted. "Because I count 17 different documents here with my name on them, and I never signed a single one." Eleanor stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "This is ridiculous, Frank. You're being paranoid. People your age, sometimes they forget things they've signed. People my age." I kept my voice level. "Are you saying I'm mentally incompetent, Eleanor?" The trap was that simple. If she said yes, she was confirming the plan I'd found in her handwriting. If she said no, she had to explain why I wouldn't remember signing legal documents that transferred ownership of my own property. "I'm saying you're obviously confused and upset about something and you're looking for someone to blame." Martha found her voice then. "Frank, honey, maybe you should sit down. You seem agitated." Agitated. Of course I seemed agitated. I just discovered my wife and mother-in-law had been systematically forging my signature and planning my legal destruction. But that wasn't the word they wanted the neighbors to remember if anyone asked later. Agitated could become threatening very easily in a courtroom. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, making sure they could see the recording app was running. "Let's start with this property transfer," I said, pointing to the first document. "Martha, can you explain when I signed this?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. "Or this bank account change. When did we discuss giving you sole access to our joint account?" "Frank, you're scaring me," she whispered. Scaring her. Another word for their file. Frank is acting threatening, aggressive, scary. Martha fears for her safety. "I'm scaring you by asking about my own signature on legal documents I've never seen before." Eleanor jumped in then, her voice sharp with authority. "This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior we've been concerned about, Frank, making wild accusations against people who love you." Paranoid behavior. I repeated her words clearly, for the recording. So you're saying I'm paranoid for finding forged documents in my own basement. I'm saying you're obviously having some kind of episode, and we need to get you help. There it was. The nuclear option from Eleanor's handwritten plan. If Frank objects to anything we do, claim he's having a mental health crisis and needs intervention, but I'd been expecting it. An episode, I said. Like the kind that would require guardianship proceedings? The silence in that room was deafening. Eleanor's face went from red to white to red again. Martha looked like she was going to be sick. How did you? Eleanor started, then caught herself. How did I know about the guardianship plan? It's in your handwriting, Eleanor, along with the timeline for isolating me from family events, transferring my assets and filing fraudulent divorce papers. Martha, I need you to listen very carefully. These documents represent multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, the kind of charges that carry real prison time. Martha started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone whose plan had failed, and who was about to face consequences. We never meant to hurt you, she sobbed. We just wanted to protect ourselves. Protect yourselves. From what? From having a roof over your heads? From never worrying about money? From having someone who loved you unconditionally? Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. You never belonged in this family, Frank. You're not their father. You're not my son-in-law. You're just some old man who married my daughter for companionship. Finally, the truth. After 20 years of pretending to accept me, Eleanor's real feelings came pouring out. Some old man who's been paying every bill and supporting every member of this family for 2 decades. Money doesn't make you family, she screamed. Neither does forgery and fraud, Eleanor. Martha was still crying, but now she was angry too. You're being cruel, Frank. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. We don't have to involve lawyers or courts or... You already involved lawyers and courts, Martha. You've been meeting with attorneys for 6 months, planning my legal destruction with money from our joint account. I picked up the divorce petition and read from it. Frank Morrison has become increasingly controlling and financially abusive. Martha Morrison fears for her safety. That was just preliminary, Martha said quickly. We never filed it. You never filed it yet. But you were ready to. The moment I became inconvenient or started asking too many questions, Eleanor tried one more attack. This is exactly what I mean. Look how you're treating us right now. Aggressive, threatening, making accusations. I'm reading from legal documents you prepared, Eleanor. Documents with my forged signature on them. Documents that constitute multiple felonies under state and federal law. The room went quiet, except for Martha's sniffling. What do you want? Eleanor asked finally. What did I want? 20 years ago I'd wanted a family to love and protect. I'd wanted to be a husband and father to build something lasting with people who appreciated what I brought to their lives. But that family had never really existed. It had been a performance, maintained as long as I was useful and abandoned the moment I became inconvenient. I want the truth, I said finally. All of it. How long has this been planned? Who else is involved? What other documents have you forged? Martha looked at Eleanor, then back at me. Frank, please. Can we just talk about this privately, without recording everything? This is still my house, Eleanor, I said, ignoring Martha's request. But not for the reasons you think. They both stared at me. Something in my tone had changed, and they could hear it. What does that mean? Eleanor demanded. But I was done talking. I had everything I needed for now. The recordings, the photographs of the documents, and most importantly, their admissions of guilt captured on audio. It means you should call your lawyer, Martha. You're going to need one. I picked up my phone and the forged documents and walked out of my own dining room, leaving them sitting at the table where we'd shared 20 years of family dinners. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor's voice rising in panic and Martha crying harder. But I didn't look back. I had a phone call to make. My lawyer looked at the forged documents and said 3 words that changed everything. This is felony fraud. Then he smiled and opened a file I'd forgotten about, my first wife's will from 25 years ago. Robert Chen had been my attorney since before I married Martha. He'd handled my first wife's estate, the legal work for my construction business, and every major contract I'd signed for 2.5 decades. If anyone understood my real financial position, it was Robert. "Frank," he said, spreading the forged documents across his desk, "this is systematic identity theft, multiple felonies, conspiracy charges. We're talking about serious prison time if we pursue this criminally." I sat across from his desk, still feeling the shock of how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. Identity theft alone is up to 15 years. Add in the systematic nature of this, the financial fraud, the conspiracy between multiple parties, Martha could be looking at 25 years if a prosecutor decides to make an example. 25 years. Martha was 53 years old. That would be most of the rest of her life. But that wasn't what made Robert smile. However, he continued, "Before we decide how to handle the criminal charges, there's something else you need to know about your legal position." He pulled out a thick file folder, one I recognized but hadn't thought about in years. "Do you remember your first wife's will?" My first wife, Catherine, had died 28 years ago from cancer. We'd been young, barely 30, but she'd insisted on getting our legal affairs in order when the diagnosis came back terminal. "Vaguely," I said. "It's been so long." Catherine was a smart woman. She set up a family trust before she died, with very specific provisions about property ownership and inheritance rights. I'd forgotten about the trust. After Catherine died, I'd been too grief-stricken to pay much attention to legal details. Robert had handled everything, and I'd just signed where he told me to sign. "The house you live in now," Robert continued, "was purchased using funds from that trust, which means it's not marital property, Frank. It's your separate property, completely protected from any divorce settlement." The room seemed to tilt. "What do you mean?" "I mean Martha has no legal claim to that house whatsoever. None. Zero. The trust provisions are ironclad." But that wasn't the biggest surprise. "Furthermore," Robert said, opening another section of the file, "your construction business has been operating under trust provisions for 25 years. Catherine's family had money, Frank. Real money. When she died, she made sure you'd be taken care of." I stared at him. "How much money?" "Current value of the trust assets, including property investments and business holdings, approximately $2.8 million. I nearly fell out of my chair. "That's impossible. The trust has been managed by an investment firm in Chicago all these years. Every year they send reports to this office. You never asked about them, so I just filed them away. But the trust has been growing steadily for 25 years. $2.8 million. I'd been living like a middle-class retiree, worrying about mortgage payments and retirement savings, while sitting on a fortune I'd forgotten existed." "There's more," Robert said. "Your construction business? All those contracts you've signed, all those property investments you made over the years? They were funded by trust assets. Catherine's trust has been the silent partner in your business for 2.5 decades." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. So when Martha and Eleanor tried to forge documents transferring my assets, they were attempting to steal property they had no legal right to even touch: the house, the business, even your bank accounts that are connected to trust assets. None of it is marital property. Robert leaned back in his chair, and I could see he was enjoying this. "Frank, not only can we defend against their fraud criminally, we can sue them civilly for attempted theft of trust assets, which, given the amounts involved, would be a federal crime." Federal crime. Martha and Eleanor hadn't just been planning to steal from me, they'd been planning to steal from a legal trust, which brought federal prosecutors and FBI involvement into the picture. "What are my options?" I asked. Robert pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Option 1. We file criminal charges immediately. Martha and Eleanor go to prison. You keep everything, case closed. Option 2. We let them think they're still winning while we prepare a comprehensive legal response. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak. I thought about the recordings I'd made the night before, Martha and Eleanor's admissions of guilt, their panic when they realized I'd found their documents. What would option 2 accomplish that option 1 wouldn't? Robert smiled again. Option 2 lets us catch everyone involved. The lawyer who helped them prepare those documents, for instance. Any other family members who were part of the conspiracy. Anyone who helped them forge your signature or advised them on asset transfer strategies. There are others. There are always others, Frank. This kind of systematic fraud doesn't happen in isolation. I thought about the stepchildren who'd suddenly stopped calling me Dad. The friends of Martha's who'd started treating me differently over the past few months. The subtle changes in how I was treated at family gatherings. How many people had known what was coming? How long would option 2 take? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Long enough for them to make more mistakes, involve more people, maybe even try to file some of those forged documents officially. 2 more weeks of living with people who were actively trying to destroy my life. 2 more weeks of pretending I didn't know what they were planning. But the alternative was letting unknown conspirators escape justice. Let's do option 2, I said. Robert nodded and made a note. I'll need authorization to begin protecting your assets immediately. We'll freeze accounts, file protective orders, make sure they can't cause any real damage while we're gathering evidence. Do it. He handed me a stack of papers to sign. Real papers this time with my actual signature on them. One more thing, Frank. When this is over, you're going to need to make some decisions about your living situation. That house holds a lot of painful memories now. He was right. Even if I won legally, even if Martha and Eleanor faced consequences for what they'd done, I wasn't sure I could ever feel comfortable in that house again. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I said. Robert gathered up the forged documents and placed them in his safe. Frank, I want you to be prepared for what's coming. When people realize how much money is actually involved here, this is going to get ugly. Uglier than it already is? Much uglier. We're talking about millions of dollars and serious prison time. People will do desperate things to avoid those consequences. I thought about Eleanor's handwritten plan, Martha's 6 months of secret meetings with lawyers, the photographs they'd taken to document my supposed mental decline. I think I'm ready for ugly, Robert. But I wasn't ready. Not really, because I had no idea how far they were willing to go to protect themselves. I went home and acted like nothing happened. For 2 weeks I let Martha and Eleanor think they were winning while my lawyer quietly froze every account they thought they could access. Walking back into that house was like entering enemy territory. Every smile from Martha felt like a knife. Every casual comment about my day felt like intelligence gathering. Every kiss goodnight felt like a betrayal. But I'd committed to Robert's strategy, and I was going to see it through. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening. In the comments. How was your day, honey? Martha asked when I came home from Robert's office. Quiet, I said. The same answer I'd given her for 20 years, but now it carried different weight. Spent some time thinking about things. What kind of things? She asked, and I could hear the anxiety under her casual tone. Just life. Getting older, what's really important? She relaxed visibly. In her mind, this was perfect. Frank was having an existential crisis about aging, becoming more dependent, more manageable. Well, you know I'm here for you, she said, kissing my cheek. Whatever you need. Whatever I needed, like forged signatures and stolen assets and divorce papers claiming I was abusive. I apologized for being paranoid about the documents I'd found. I told Martha and Eleanor that I'd been feeling stressed and confused lately, that maybe they were right about my mental state. I think I was just scared. I told Eleanor during her next visit, scared of getting old. Scared of being alone. I took it out on you and Martha, and I'm sorry. Eleanor's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. This was exactly what she'd been hoping for. Frank admitting he was having mental problems, apologizing for questioning their authority. Oh, Frank, she said, patting my hand like I was a confused child. We understand. Aging is hard for everyone. The important thing is that you trust us to help you through this difficult time. Trust them to help me. While they were systematically stealing everything I owned. Over the next 2 weeks I played the role of the declining old man perfectly. I asked Martha to help me with simple tasks I'd been doing myself for decades. I let Eleanor make decisions about household matters that had always been my responsibility. And I watched them become bolder. Martha started bringing men to the house during the day. Not just one man, 9 different men. She introduced them as friends from work or old acquaintances, but I could see what was happening. She was auditioning replacements. One afternoon, I came home early and found her with a man I'd never seen before. They were sitting very close on the couch, looking at real estate listings on her laptop. "Oh, Frank." Martha jumped up, flustered. "This is David. He's a financial advisor. I was asking him about retirement planning." David stood up and shook my hand with the confident grip of a man who thought he was meeting his future victim. "Your wife was telling me about your concerns about aging," he said smoothly. "I specialize in helping couples plan for uncertain futures." Uncertain futures. Like what would happen to a confused old man's assets when his wife divorced him for being mentally incompetent. "That's very thoughtful of Martha," I said. "Always thinking ahead." I excused myself and went to my study, where I turned on the recording app on my phone and left it running while I worked on paperwork. Within an hour I had recordings of Martha and David discussing my deteriorating mental state and the need to protect assets from poor decision-making. But I didn't know then that David wasn't just a random financial advisor. He was Eleanor's nephew, brought in specifically to help with the next phase of their plan. Eleanor started making increasingly cruel comments about my age and mental capacity, but now she framed them as concern for my well-being. "Frank, honey, you left the stove on again yesterday," she told Martha in front of me. "Maybe it's time to think about getting some help around here?" I'd never left the stove on, but Martha nodded seriously, like this was part of a pattern she'd been documenting. "I've been worried about that too, Mom. And yesterday he couldn't remember where he put his glasses." My glasses had been in the bathroom, where I'd left them while shaving, but in their narrative this became evidence of cognitive decline. Every normal moment of daily life was being reinterpreted as proof that I needed supervision and management. The most chilling moment came when I overheard Eleanor on the phone with someone, arranging what sounded like a medical consultation. "Yes, he's showing all the classic signs," she said. "Paranoia, confusion, difficulty with routine tasks. His wife is very concerned." A medical consultation. They were building a case for having me declared mentally incompetent, complete with professional medical opinions purchased with my own money. But their biggest mistake was getting greedy. Martha started draining our joint accounts more aggressively, transferring larger amounts to her private account. She thought I wasn't paying attention to the finances anymore, that my mental decline meant I'd stopped monitoring our money. She was wrong. Every transaction was being documented by Robert's office. Every forged signature was photographed and cataloged. Every lie told to medical professionals was recorded and saved. They thought they were winning, but they were actually building the case against themselves. The breaking point came when Eleanor suggested it was time to update our wills and insurance policies. "Just to make sure everything is in order," she told Martha in front of me, "in case Frank becomes unable to make his own decisions." Unable to make my own decisions, the language of guardianship proceedings. "That's a good idea," Martha agreed. "Frank, would you be okay with Mom helping us organize our legal paperwork? She's so much better at that stuff than we are." They wanted me to hand over my legal documents willingly, to let Eleanor organize my will and insurance policies the same way they'd organized the forged property transfers. "Of course," I said. "Whatever you think is best." That night, Martha gleefully called Eleanor to report my compliance. "He's completely broken," she said, not knowing I was recording every word. "David thinks we can move to the final phase within a week." Final phase? I didn't want to know what that meant, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. The next morning, I called Robert. "It's time," I said. "Are you sure?" We could let this run a little longer, see how far they're willing to go. I'm sure, before they do something I can't come back from." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Frank, once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. These people are going to face serious consequences." I thought about Martha's excited phone calls to Eleanor, David the financial advisor who was really Eleanor's nephew, the medical consultations being arranged to have me declared incompetent. "Good," I said. "I'll make the calls this afternoon. Sheriff's Department first, then the prosecutor's office. By tomorrow morning this will be out of your hands and in the legal system." What should I do? Nothing. Act normal, let them think everything is proceeding according to their plan. The less they suspect, the more evidence we'll catch them with. I spent my last day as the victim of their conspiracy watching Martha and Eleanor make plans for my destruction, knowing that in 12 hours their world would collapse around them. It was the longest day of my life. The sheriff arrived at 7 a.m. with arrest warrants. Martha was still in bed with her boyfriend when they knocked on the door of my house. I opened the door in my bathrobe, playing the confused old man one last time. "Officers? Is there some kind of problem?" "We need to speak with Martha Morrison, sir." "Is she here?" "She's upstairs sleeping." "What's this about?" The lead deputy, a woman about my daughter's age if I'd had a daughter, looked at me with sympathy. "Sir, we have warrants for Mrs. Morrison's arrest on charges of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy." I let my face show shock and confusion. "Arrest? Martha? There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not, sir. We also need you to step outside while we execute the warrant. This is for your safety as much as hers." I was putting on my jacket when I heard shouting from upstairs. Martha's voice, high and panicked, and a man's voice I didn't recognize cursing loudly. The boyfriend, David the financial advisor, caught in bed with his co-conspirator when the police came knocking. "What the hell is going on?" Martha screamed as two deputies escorted her downstairs in handcuffs. She was wearing a silk negligee I'd bought her for Valentine's Day, her hair messy from sleep and sex with another man in my bed. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for identity theft in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." David tried to slip out the back door in his underwear, but there were deputies waiting for him too. Apparently Eleanor's nephew had his own warrants. "This is insane." Martha kept screaming. "Frank, tell them this is crazy. Tell them I would never." But I couldn't tell them anything because Eleanor chose that moment to pull into the driveway. She'd probably come to check on the progress of their final phase, maybe bring more legal documents for me to sign while I was in my compliant mental state. Instead, she walked into a crime scene. "What is happening here?" Eleanor demanded, marching up to the deputies like she owned the place. "Why are you arresting my daughter? This is harassment." "Ma'am, are you Eleanor Whitfield?" "Yes, I am. And I demand to know." "Eleanor Whitfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Eleanor's face went through the same progression of emotions I'd watched 2 weeks earlier when I'd confronted them with the forged documents. Confusion, recognition, panic, rage. But this time, the rage couldn't help her. "This is ridiculous. We were protecting him. Frank has been showing signs of dementia. We were trying to help." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." But Eleanor wasn't capable of remaining silent. As they handcuffed her next to Martha in my driveway, she kept screaming about how this was all wrong, how they were the victims, how I was a confused old man being manipulated by lawyers. "Frank," Martha called out as they loaded her into the police car. "Frank, please, tell them the truth. Tell them I love you." I watched from my front step as the three people who'd been systematically planning my destruction were driven away in the back of police cars. The neighbors had come out to watch. 20 years of living on this street, being the reliable neighbor who helped with yard work and snow removal, and now they were seeing my wife and mother-in-law arrested for stealing from me. But that wasn't the end of the revelations. Detective Rodriguez stayed behind to brief me on what they'd found during their investigation. "Mr. Morrison, I need to prepare you for what's coming. This conspiracy involved more people than just your wife and mother-in-law. How many more? We've identified at least 6 co-conspirators so far. The nephew who was posing as a financial advisor, 2 lawyers who helped prepare fraudulent documents, a doctor who was prepared to declare you mentally incompetent for money, and both of your stepchildren. Both stepchildren. Jason and Rebecca had known about this all along. What was their role? According to the evidence we've seized, they were supposed to support their mother's claims about your mental decline, testify in court about concerning behavior they'd witnessed, corroborate her stories about feeling afraid of you. The Father's Day exclusion suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just cruelty, it was preparation. Getting the stepchildren used to treating me like an outsider so they'd be ready to betray me in court when the time came. There's more. Detective Rodriguez continued. We found evidence that your wife has been having multiple affairs over the past 2 years. The men she was bringing to your house weren't just random mind jov, they were potential marks for her next marriage scam. Next marriage scam. Martha hadn't just been planning to leave me, she'd been planning to move on to her next victim. The doctor, who was going to declare you incompetent, he's done this before. We think your wife and mother-in-law were part of a larger elder abuse network that targets wealthy older men. I sat down heavily on my front step. It was worse than I'd imagined. I hadn't just been betrayed by my family. I'd been targeted by professional criminals who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck to be stolen. Mr. Morrison, are you okay? I looked up at Detective Rodriguez, a woman young enough to be my daughter who was looking at me with genuine concern. I will be, I said. Eventually. She handed me a business card. The prosecutor will want to meet with you later this week to go over your testimony. This is going to be a complex case, but the evidence is overwhelming. These people are going to prison. Prison, Martha, Eleanor, David, the corrupt doctor, the crooked lawyers, and possibly Jason and Rebecca too. 20 years of marriage, and it was ending with criminal trials and federal charges. But as I watched the police cars disappear down my street, I realized something important. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own house. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late June. I'd been preparing for weeks, going over my testimony with Robert and the prosecutor, organizing evidence, making sure I understood every aspect of the case. Martha had been released on bail, but with conditions. She couldn't contact me, couldn't come within 500 feet of the house, and couldn't access any of our joint accounts. Eleanor was also out on bail, living with her sister and facing similar restrictions. The morning of the hearing, I sat in my car outside the courthouse watching lawyers and defendants stream through the entrance. 20 years ago, I'd walked into a courthouse to get married. Today I was walking into the same building to see that marriage destroyed by criminal charges. Robert met me at the security checkpoint. Frank, I need to prepare you for what's going to happen in there. Martha's defense is going to be ugly. How ugly? They're going to claim you were emotionally abusive, that Martha was afraid of you, that everything she did was in self-defense against a controlling, potentially violent husband. Emotionally abusive, controlling, potentially violent. The same lies from their original plan now being used as a legal defense. The good news is we have recordings that prove those claims are false. The bad news is she's going to say them in open court in front of everyone you know. I thought about the neighbors who'd watched Martha get arrested, the business associates who'd heard about the charges, the stepchildren who were probably going to testify against me. I'm ready, I said. But I wasn't ready for how small Martha looked sitting at the defendant's table. She'd lost weight during the weeks since her arrest. Her hair was shorter, grayer, and she was wearing a conservative blue dress that made her look like a frightened middle-aged woman instead of the calculating criminal I'd discovered her to be. Eleanor sat beside her, equally diminished. Without their confidence and authority, they looked like what they really were. 2 people who'd gotten caught stealing and were desperate to avoid the consequences. When Martha's public defender stood up to present her case, I understood why her original lawyer had quit. Your Honor, he began, my client is a victim of domestic abuse who was trying to protect herself and her family from an increasingly unstable and controlling husband. He painted a picture of me, as an older man who'd used financial power to dominate and intimidate Martha, who'd gradually isolated her from friends and family, who'd made her afraid to challenge his decisions about money or household management. Mrs. Morrison was documenting her husband's concerning behavior because she was genuinely afraid for her safety and the safety of her children. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Walsh, let him finish his presentation before she destroyed it. Your Honor, the defendant claims she was afraid of her husband, but the evidence shows that Mrs. Morrison spent 6 months secretly meeting with lawyers, systematically forging her husband's signature on legal documents, and draining joint accounts to fund her preparation for divorce. She presented bank records showing Martha's financial manipulations, photographs of the forged documents, and most damning of all, audio recordings of Martha and Eleanor discussing their plan. This is not the behavior of an abuse victim, Your Honor. This is the behavior of a calculating criminal who saw her husband as nothing more than an asset to be stolen. When they played the recording of Martha telling Eleanor that the old fool is completely broken, you could hear gasps from the gallery. There was nothing fearful or defensive in her voice, only cold satisfaction at her manipulation. Eleanor's testimony as a character witness was a disaster. Under cross-examination, Patricia Walsh walked her through every element of the handwritten plan they'd found in my basement. Mrs. Whitfield, did you write established pattern of Frank's mental decline in your own handwriting? I was concerned about his welfare. Did you write use forged signatures if necessary in your own handwriting? We were trying to protect the family assets. Did you write threaten guardianship proceedings in your own handwriting? Eleanor's voice got smaller with each question. By the time Patricia finished, Eleanor had been forced to admit under oath that she'd encouraged Martha to forge my signature, isolate me from family events, and prepare false accusations of abuse and mental incompetence. But the most devastating moment came when they called David to testify. Eleanor's nephew had already pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for cooperation with the prosecution. His testimony revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Eleanor approached me about 6 months ago, he said. She told me they needed help managing an elderly relative who was becoming difficult to control. What kind of help? Financial advice, ways to transfer assets without the person knowing, strategies for getting power of attorney or guardianship if he became uncooperative. Did she mention that this elderly relative was her daughter's husband? Not at first. She made it sound like he was some distant family member who needed management. David's testimony revealed that this wasn't Eleanor's first time manipulating elderly relatives. She'd helped orchestrate similar schemes against her own father and an uncle, gradually transferring their assets to family members while claiming to protect them from their own poor judgment. Martha was part of a family tradition of elder abuse. When Martha finally took the stand in her own defense, she tried to present herself as a devoted wife who'd been pushed too far by an increasingly difficult husband. Frank changed after we got married, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He became possessive, controlling. He monitored every penny I spent, questioned every decision I made. Patricia Walsh was ready for her. Mrs. Morrison, who paid the mortgage on your house for 20 years. Frank did. But who paid for your children's college educations? Frank did. But that doesn't give him the right to. Who paid for your mother's medical expenses, her car payments, and her country club membership? Frank, but. And your response to 20 years of financial support was to forge his signature and steal his assets. Martha's composure cracked completely. You don't understand what it was like living with him. Always having to be grateful. Always having to ask permission for everything. So, you decided to take everything without asking. The courtroom was silent except for Martha's crying. When the stepchildren were called to testify, they tried to support their mother's claims about my behavior, but their testimony fell apart under questioning. Jason claimed I'd been increasingly aggressive in recent months, but he couldn't provide any specific examples. Rebecca testified that I'd made her feel uncomfortable at family gatherings, but admitted under oath that she'd never mentioned these concerns to anyone until after her mother's arrest. Their obvious lies damaged Martha's case more than helping it. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The evidence shows a systematic conspiracy to defraud Mr. Morrison of his assets through forged documents, identity theft, and false accusations of mental incompetence. The defendant's claims of abuse are not supported by evidence and appear to be fabricated to justify criminal behavior. Martha was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for identity theft and conspiracy. Eleanor got 6 years for her role in the conspiracy. David and the other co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 2 to 4 years. The stepchildren avoided criminal charges by agreeing to testify truthfully and pay restitution, but their betrayal was now a matter of public record. As I walked out of the courthouse, reporters asked me how I felt about the sentences. "Justice was served," I said. "That's all I wanted." But that wasn't entirely true. What I really wanted was my family back. The family I thought I'd had for 20 years before I discovered it had never really existed. I walked to my car alone, legally vindicated but emotionally exhausted, and drove home to a house that no longer felt like home. The legal victory was complete, but my life still felt like it was in ruins. 6 months later, I sold the house where I'd been treated like a stranger. With the money, I bought a small cabin by a lake where nobody questions whether I belong. The house sold quickly. Too many people in town knew about the criminal trial, the arrests, the betrayal. Every room held memories that had been poisoned by the truth about Martha and Eleanor's plans. I took very little with me to the cabin. Some clothes, a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to my first wife, Catherine, and a box of photographs from before I met Martha. Pictures of Catherine and me when we were young, before cancer stole her from me and left me vulnerable to a different kind of predator. The cabin sits on 10 acres beside a small lake, surrounded by pine trees and connected to the road by a gravel driveway that discourages casual visitors. It's simple, clean, and entirely mine. No mortgage payments to someone else's mother-in-law. No stepchildren who might someday decide I'm not really family. Martha served 2 years of her 8-year sentence before being released on parole. The federal system is overcrowded, and white-collar criminals often serve less than their full terms if they show good behavior. I know this because she wrote me letters. The first letter arrived 3 months after I moved to the cabin. The return address showed she was in a minimum security facility in Ohio, and the letter was 6 pages of handwritten apologies and explanations. She was sorry. She'd been confused and influenced by her mother. She'd made terrible mistakes, but she'd never stopped loving me. Could I find it in my heart to forgive her? I read the letter once, then filed it away without responding. The second letter came 2 months later. This one was shorter, more desperate. She was having a difficult time in prison. Other inmates didn't treat her well. Could I at least put some money in her commissary account? I filed that letter away too. By the time the 10th letter arrived, the tone had changed completely. Martha was angry now, bitter about the vindictive prosecution that had destroyed her life over what she called a family misunderstanding. I stopped reading them after that. The letters kept coming, but I put them directly in a box without opening them. Eleanor died in prison after 18 months. A heart attack. According to the notification I received from the Department of Corrections, she was 76 years old. I didn't attend her funeral. Martha's family blamed me for Eleanor's death, claiming the stress of prosecution and imprisonment had killed a woman who was only trying to protect her daughter. The stepchildren reached out after Eleanor's death. Jason called first, suggesting we should put the past behind us and rebuild our relationship, but his real interest became clear when he mentioned that Eleanor's death meant Martha would inherit some family property, and wouldn't it be better for everyone if I helped Martha get back on her feet when she was released? Rebecca's approach was more subtle. She visited the cabin unannounced, bringing homemade cookies and acting like nothing had happened between us. She talked about her job, her marriage, her kids, my grandchildren who asked about their grandfather. But when she left, she also left behind a folder of financial documents showing Martha's mounting legal debts and medical expenses from prison. The message was clear. Help Martha financially, and you can be part of the family again. I threw the documents in the fire and changed my phone number. The most meaningful change in my life has been my relationship with Catherine's memory. For 20 years with Martha, I'd kept Catherine's photographs and belongings packed away, stored in boxes in the basement. Martha had always been jealous of Catherine, resentful of any mention of my first wife. Eleanor had been even worse, making cruel comments about how some people can't let go of the past. Now Catherine's pictures are displayed throughout the cabin. Her books are on my shelves. Her jewelry is in a place of honor on my dresser, where I can see it every morning and remember what real love looked like. I talk to her sometimes, sitting by the lake in the evening, watching the sun set over the water. "You tried to warn me," I tell her photograph. "You set up that trust to protect me, even though you knew you wouldn't be here to see me use it." Catherine had been smarter than I gave her credit for. 28 years old and dying of cancer, and she'd still had the foresight to create legal protections for the widower she was leaving behind. She'd known I'd be vulnerable. She'd known someone might try to take advantage of my grief and loneliness. She just hadn't known it would take me 25 years to need those protections. I've reconnected with old friends from my construction days, men who knew me before Martha, who remember what I was like when I was just Frank Morrison instead of Martha's husband or Eleanor's victim. We fish together on weekends, work on small carpentry projects, share meals and stories in comfortable silences. They don't ask about the trial or the divorce, or how I'm handling everything. They just treat me like myself. I've also started volunteering with a legal aid organization that helps elderly people avoid financial abuse. Apparently, what happened to me is more common than I'd realized. Every week I meet with older adults who've been targeted by family members, caregivers, or romantic partners who see them as sources of money rather than human beings. My story helps them understand they're not alone, and my legal victory gives them hope that justice is possible. But I don't feel victorious. I feel tired and sad and grateful to be free. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday in October, almost exactly a year after Martha's arrest. The return address was a law firm in Ohio, and I almost threw it away without reading it. I'd received enough legal correspondence about restitution payments and asset recovery to last a lifetime. But something about the letterhead looked different, so I opened it. Martha was dying. Liver cancer, diagnosed 3 months earlier. The prison medical system had delayed treatment, and by the time she received proper care, the cancer had spread throughout her body. She had requested permission to write me one final letter, and the prison chaplain had asked the law firm to forward it if I was willing to receive it. I sat by the lake for an hour, holding that unopened envelope, trying to decide if I wanted to read Martha's last words to me. Finally, I opened it. The letter was different from all the others. No apologies, no excuses, no requests for money or forgiveness. Just a dying woman trying to explain something she'd never been able to explain while she was healthy. "Frank," she wrote, "I need you to know that I did love you, not the way you deserve to be loved, but in the only way I was capable of loving anyone. My mother taught me that love was a transaction, that security was more important than happiness, that men were resources to be managed rather than partners to be trusted. I thought I was protecting myself and my children by planning to leave you with nothing. I thought that's what smart women did. They took care of themselves first because no one else would. I was wrong about everything. You were the best man I ever knew, and I repaid your love with betrayal because I was too broken to recognize what I had. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that the 20 years we spent together weren't a complete lie. In my damaged way, I did love you. I hope you find peace, Frank. You deserve so much better than what I gave you." The letter was signed simply Martha in handwriting that was shaky and weak. I read it 3 times, then walked to the edge of the lake and burned it. She died 2 weeks later. I received a notification from the Department of Corrections, but no invitation to a funeral. Her family still blamed me for her imprisonment and death. I spent that day sitting by the lake, thinking about the difference between justice and forgiveness, between being right and being whole. Martha had destroyed our marriage and tried to steal my life, but she'd also been a victim of Eleanor's manipulation and her own damaged understanding of love and security. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me understand why she'd done it. As winter settled over the lake, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't happy exactly, but I was at peace. I lived in a place I'd chosen, surrounded by things that belonged to me, free from people who saw me as anything other than who I actually was. I'd learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. In that house with Martha and Eleanor, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I'd been desperately lonely. Here in my cabin, living alone but connected to friends who valued me and memories that sustained me, I was content. The trust Catherine had established to protect me would support me for the rest of my life. I had enough money to live comfortably, to help friends when they needed it, to donate to causes I believed in. More importantly, I had enough self-respect to never again accept treatment that made me question my own worth. Spring came early to the lake, and with it came a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. I was 70 years old, legally vindicated, financially secure, and finally free to be myself without apology or explanation. It had taken me 25 years to fully appreciate Catherine's final gift to me. Not just the trust that protected my assets, but the knowledge that real love means wanting to protect someone even when you can't be there to do it yourself. Martha's version of love had been about taking what she could get while she could get it. Catherine's love had been about giving me what I would need long after she was gone. I knew which kind of love I wanted to remember and which kind I wanted to forget. As I sat by the lake that evening, watching the sun set over water that belonged to no one and everyone, I realized my story wasn't about revenge at all. It was about discovering the difference between being wanted and being valued, between being used and being loved, between surviving and living. I'd survived Martha and Eleanor's betrayal, but now I was finally learning how to live again. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.